Although I was listening to some of the language selection there from Chrystia Freeland, and if you listen to that, it's all about optimistic signal sending. She said she's extremely optimistic. She said she's extremely familiar, and the Canadians are extremely familiar with the issues that are being negotiated. She said they're working extremely hard, and she said it's extremely intensive right now. So a lot of extreme language there, but clearly that extremely optimistic is the sign that I think the general public is going to take away from this, signaling that they could be on the way to a deal as early as that Friday deadline. But of course, the devil is in the details in these things. We'll see how it plays out, and you've got to wonder what the political popularity or unpopularity of President Trump in Canada is, and how that plays into the domestic political consumption of this deal. Is this a deal that Justin Trudeau can sign on to, given his personal feud with the President of the United States? The President has called him dishonest and other insults, and that hasn't played very well in Canada. So can they patch that over even as they negotiate some of these high-level details?
Yeah, watching some of the price actions of individual names, you get a name like KSU, often seen as a proxy for NAFTA, up about 1.5%. But Phil LeBeau, the automakers, GM, Ford, FCAU, all in the red.
Yeah, and Carl, I think part of the reason they're down is because we still don't know the details behind what's been negotiated with Mexico. There was a report earlier today of a side agreement which might put a cap at how many vehicles could come out of Mexico into the United States before a 25% tariff might kick in. No indication of what the language is there in terms of how it would be implemented after that. In other words, would one company, because they ship vehicle 25,050, would they suddenly see a 25% tariff? So a lot of questions, and I think that's part of what you're seeing with the auto stocks a little bit under pressure. Keep this in mind. 24% of the vehicles that are bought in the United States are built in Canada and Mexico. So there's a lot at stake here.
Phil, it's hard to read, from my perspective, exactly how the auto industry might come out of this. Even if Canada signs on, it seems as if it does add some complications to their supply chain, and of course,
yes,
that kind of minimum labor cost standard.
It does add complications, and they're going to have to figure out, okay, how do we meet these new standards that have been built into the content origins? In other words, how many will have to come from the United States, at what labor rate, wage rate? That's not as much of a concern with Canada, and that you heard Chrystia Freeland talking about that. Look, their wages are fairly comparable to the United States. It's a huge issue down in Mexico where they're paying way lower than the United States, which is why that was a key component with that agreement between the U.S. and Mexico.
We'll watch that closely. By the way, just as a corollary to all this, Tesla's down almost 2%, 306 now. One last question for you, Eamon. If there is this meeting today at 5, what's the likelihood we actually hear from Lighthizer himself?
Well, I think if they get something signed, sealed, and delivered, you're going to hear it from the president himself. And the president has been keeping a very close eye on these negotiations and wants to talk about this, wants to trumpet a victory here. One other thing to keep an eye on, though, is all the external factors that could get in the way. We saw the president talking about this deal with Mexico with reporters in the Oval Office earlier this week, and he said, as almost an aside, you know what, Mexico is going to pay for the wall. They're going to pay for it very easily. And then we saw the Mexican side react instantly to that, posting a tweet saying, we're not going to pay for the wall. We're happy with these negotiations, but we're not paying for the president's wall. So all of these other issues could come into play here at the high level before they get this thing signed, sealed, and delivered. But I would expect that the president will want to come out and announce this personally if they do get a big victory here this week.